Hi, and welcome back to STS 1451. We're getting to the finish line here, and today we're going to be talking about AIDS activism. Our keywords, concepts, and names include lay expertise, disease constituencies, treatment activists or treatment activism, credibility, ACT UP, clean data, and all of these terms can be found in your reading. Why study AIDS in particular, of the many diseases that we've experienced throughout history? My answer is that in the post-lab universalist biomedical paradigm of medicine, clinical trials valued clean data, that is, rigorous, methodical, and slow studies of patients who aren't taking and haven't taken other drugs. You'll see what our authors think about clean data when you complete our reading for today if you haven't already. As we've seen, the laboratory made it so that only trained experts could positively identify certain diseases. This exacerbated the schism between layperson and expert. You might not have heard the term layperson before. A layperson is someone who is not an expert. It's really defined just in the negative there, someone without expertise, and in this case, without scientific or medical expertise. We can see what can be gained from this post-lab approach when you're looking to isolate drug interactions. So you want clean data. In other words, you want to do a drug trial on someone who's not taking other drugs so that you know if your one specific drug works. But AIDS activists also drew the nation's attention to the human toll of that supposedly objective practice. And this is why we want to study AIDS in particular, because AIDS activism was remarkable, and it really shaped the way that other disease constituencies, or people who came together because they share a disease in common, push back against the medical system. We're going to be talking today about ACT UP, an organization who came up with the slogan, "Silence equals death." And these are just two pictures from their activism. If you watch even just the trailer to How to Survive a Plague, you'll see a lot more. They were really great with graphic design. They had really visually stunning interventions and protests. If you actually watch How to Survive a Plague, you'll see they even made a giant condom that they put over someone's house. They did remarkable, basically publicity stunts to draw attention to the fact that people were dying and medical professionals could help. ACT UP, which stands for the AIDS Coalition to Unleash Power, did more than protest and critique. They also changed practices. So they're really important in the history of medicine because of how they changed the relationship between the patient activist and the medical establishment. That involved building lay expertise so that treatment activists could master the jargon of scientists and be allowed access to the halls of power. That word or phrase, lay expertise, might seem paradoxical to you because I just define layperson as the opposite of expert. But what they mean here is somebody who was not trained, did not go to medical school, doesn't know how to work in a lab, but trained themselves enough so that they could converse with people in laboratories, medical researchers, even people working at the CDC, including Dr. Fauci. This is from our Stephen Epstein reading for today. Quote, "Activist movements, through amassing different forms of credibility, can in certain circumstances become genuine participants in the construction of scientific knowledge, that they can, within definite limits, affect changes both in the epistemic practices of biomedical research and in the therapeutic techniques of medical care." So, first of all, epistemic is a word that means the way that you come to know something, the way that you learn. So when they challenged, when AIDS activists challenged the emphasis on clean data and said, no, you have to do trials on the way people actually live, they made a strong case for this by pointing out that no one who would actually be taking these therapeutics in the real world would be living as clean data. So they pointed out a flaw with that assumption in the way that drug trials were run. And they changed the techniques themselves of giving care. They changed both the way the research was done and the outcome by working together with scientists. And that's something, that's something that we could still see today. Okay. Epstein continues on page 420. Yet the extraordinary success of treatment activists stemmed in large part from their capacity to convince the biomedical establishment not only that they spoke for the larger body of patients, but also that they could mobilize hundreds or thousands of angry demonstrators to give muscle to their specific requests. And once activists monopolized the capacity to say what patients wanted, researchers could be forced to deal with them to ensure that research subjects would both enroll in their trials in sufficient numbers and comply with the study protocols. I want to pause here to emphasize that this is a really mutual relationship. So, first of all, the protests were not completely separate from the treatment activists. Not everyone in ACT UP was a treatment activist. There were only a small group of people who got educated enough to be able to specifically be talking with medical researchers. But because they came as representatives and they could say, we speak for other people who are suffering, that gave them the power to exert leverage. Pharmaceutical companies were afraid, the FDA was afraid of protests that would be staged against them, and they could say, if you don't do what we want, we're going to stage this protest. We're informed and we're making informed decisions here. But medical researchers got something out of it in return. They got the knowledge that they would get enough people enrolled in their studies in order to do their studies quickly and efficiently. So it really was a two-way street, even though patients exerted a lot more power in this case than in many other cases before or even after. Epstein continues, on the basis of their credibility, activists thus constructed themselves as an obligatory passage point, standing between the researchers and the trials they sought to conduct. Of course, by the same token, the activists wanted to see the trials conducted, so the point really is that the relationship became a powerfully symbiotic one. As Epstein shows, the women's health movement preceded and paved the way for the AIDS activist movement, but organizations like ACT UP changed the way patients organize as activists. So now if you see a group of people coming together to raise awareness about cancer or to raise awareness about ALS, for example, if any of you remember the Ice Bucket Challenge, a lot of this is sponsored by the kind of community building that ACT UP demonstrated. We've traced an arc in this class from specificity, where the patient was centered, towards universalist biomedicine that privileged the biology over the patient's full human experience. Activists push back against that turn to demand that patients have a voice. And so while social scientists like Kleiman were saying we need to put the human back in, patients were doing the same thing. And you have this push to think about the biopsychosocial from multiple angles. And that's part of why this approach is really the paradigm that's starting to be used in medical schools again now. That was it. We had a short lecture today. Next time we're going to discuss how the move towards biomedicine has affected perceptions of death, and we will reflect on end-of-life care. It's going to be another short lecture just basically to support you in thinking about a very difficult topic to discuss and reflect on emotionally. I hope you enjoyed today's lecture, and I hope you're keeping up with the class. I look forward to seeing you next time.